Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being here today. I'm very honored and excited to start a very fascinating, inspiring evening session with our partners from McLaren Racing and McLaren Technology Group. The first time McLaren visited KAUST was December of 2017. And when they came here, they brought their A-team, meaning their best players, their racing director at the time, their chief of engineering, their chief business officer, John Cooper, who's with us today. And when they came to KAUST for the first time, like most people, they did not believe what they saw. And they were excited by the facilities that we had, the capabilities and the knowledge of many of the students and researchers here. And over several meetings after that, McLaren realized KAUST is a good partner to have and could benefit them in their business, which is Formula One racing. When the announcement for WEP came last April, the theme was given as time. And immediately I thought, time, racing, there's no better match. And I hope this evening we'll have a nice program wherein you'll hear about how McLaren, not only as a team that races a vehicle, but also as an engineering company, as a technology company, as an innovation company, accelerates all of their employees and also their partners to achieve their best in whatever they do. So it's my great pleasure to invite Jonathan Neal. Jonathan Neal is a physicist by training and started his career as an electronics engineer at Phillips Defense Systems, where he was developing electronic warfare, and then went on to work for BAE Systems, developing commercial and aircraft supplementary systems and all things related to commercial and defense aircrafts. In 2001, he joined McLaren, initially playing a key role in the McLaren Racing, and most recently in 2014, becoming the Chief Operating Officer of McLaren, overseeing and directing many aspects of McLaren Technology Group, including the automotive business and their applied technologies, as well as racing. So let's give them a great KAUST welcome, and please welcome McLaren.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Manny, for such a fantastic introduction. It's a huge privilege for McLaren to be here on this stage talking to you this evening, and I might say we a few times because from our perspective, having made this decision and started this partnership, there's very much a sense from McLaren that we are going to do something extraordinary together, and I have no doubt of that. We're here for one thing in mind. We're here for performance. And from the moment that we set foot here and we met some of the people and we looked at the extraordinary facilities, the aims and the ambitions of this program, we knew this was something very special. Of course, we'd like to keep this to ourselves, so most of this will probably end up on the web somewhere and all my competitors will be piling in behind me, but at least we've got first mover advantage. So undoubtedly, McLaren is in the business of time. Like so many organizations, we can see the world speeding up around us. Of course, we're measured on a fortnightly basis, about fractions of a percentage of product and second difference between us and the other competitors who we compete with. But it's very much a race of what goes on behind the scenes. We're looking to take leading edge thinking, the kind of work that's being done here, take that and apply it and make it real in a very short period of time. And we're on public test, of those of you that follow McLaren's recent fortunes will attest. So I thought what I would do this evening is break this into four themes, the themes behind me. Who are McLaren? For those of you that may not have heard of us before. A little bit about how we see Formula One. I'd like to share some of that with you. And then what does it take to win, which is why we're here, of course, as we look to do something that's game-changing for us. And then we'll talk a little bit about the pressures of time and bringing that to life in what happens in our industry, which is extraordinary. I've had the privilege of working in some terrific programs throughout my career, from submarines to helicopters to commercial aircraft, military aircraft, Formula One programs, health analytics, but nothing moves at the space of Formula One. So let's start with who are McLaren. Our story starts here, and there's a movie showing this evening about the history of Bruce McLaren. Started in 1963, formed a racing team to take on the giants at time, a brave and bold ambition because the sport was dominated by the major automotive manufacturers. Went on to create a legacy, winning our first Formula One race in 1966 and our first Grand Prix in Spa, 1968. Driver, engineer, team builder, the complete integrated man, Renaissance man perhaps. And since then, we've had 50 years of uninterrupted racing. In that time, 100 Formula One teams have been created and failed for some reason. And over that time, what we've done is to progressively build a brand and had to continually reinvent ourselves on the stage of changing technology, changing regulations, changing appetite for sports marketing, and a fundamental change in the employee workforce and what it means to work in a Formula One business or a modern business. When I talk to the millennials and our software engineers in our offices in London, and we have around 4,000 people working in McLaren, most of them based in Woking, but some of them in London, some in Singapore, some in the dealerships around the world. But when I look at the expectations of our young software engineers and what it means to be in the place of work, compared to the baby boomer generation like myself, that is a golden mile away. And one of the things that I and my colleagues have to do is continually reinvent ourselves on this stage as we look to what does it mean to be a high-performance organization. This is a clip from one of the movies, the Hunt versus Lauda film Rush. But we've been home to some of the greatest rivalries in Formula One and in sport. If we look at some of them here, Senna versus Prost, Hunt versus Lauda, Häkkinen versus Schumacher, and. And you know you've got something very special when those rivalries punch through the sport and land in beyond the sport, into the home, into the televisions, into the common vernacular of the organization and the world, when it starts to look at these at very much a human contest. And when we look at Formula One and what it might become, if we compare with things like robo-race, or even I've seen an extreme version of racing where it's actually molecular racing with an electron as an impulse, where you're moving millimeters over 8 weeks. That doesn't make very good television, by the way. But that kind of stuff doesn't have at its heart that very visceral, that very human piece of putting a human being into a package of supported by technology, but technology can never become the reason why we go racing. It's been the home of some of the greatest drivers in Formula One. Many people here I've spoken to in the last 24 hours will remember Alain Prost, Ayrton Senna, and have a special place in their heart for somebody, whether that's a Lewis Hamilton, a Kimi Räikkönen, or otherwise. But these are the greats of Formula One. And that weight of expectation over 50 years sits on our shoulders as a legacy. You know, there is a sense of expectation about what it means to be in McLaren, what it means to be on the team, and what our peers expect of us, and what the media expect of us. And it's pretty unforgiving. It's been successful. Behind me are the Drivers' World Championships that span a number of years. But of course, if I look at Formula One in recent times, let's go from 2013 onwards, then we see that Red Bull dominated 2010 to 2013 with their World Championships, and Mercedes, of course, the last batch of championships. And what we're seeing here is the sport continuing to accelerate. And at the moment, it would be fair to say that the sport is probably dominated by how much you spend. And just to put that into context, to put 2 cars on a grid for 20 times in a year and compete with 10 of your fiercest competitors, top teams are spending somewhere in the order of $400 to $500 million a year to go racing. That's by an order of magnitude more than any other racing series. And behind that, what's fueling that all the time is high-speed research and development for what is a prototype series. I'll explain more about that in a bit. But we're taking some pain. And in order for us to make the next step and to put the next chapter of McLaren firmly in the history book, there are 2 things that we need to do. One, we need to get better, faster. And the other thing we need to do with the regulating body is change the sport. And what's coming, probably, is a cost-capped series where we shift the sport from being about how much you spend into how you spend the money that you have. So a cost cap of around $150 million, still an eye-watering amount of money, is being proposed. But then it becomes a real innovation series. If it's no longer about how much muscle you have, but it's about how you think, how you innovate, what your corporate culture is, how you bring that research and science to bear, then it's a really interesting proposition for us as a brand. And it's certainly more sustainable. So let's look at what Formula One is. Formula One means many things to many people. Can you hear me at the top here? Give me a wave. Thank you. So when I talk about Formula One, one of the things that I structure Formula One as is where sport meets technology for the business of entertainment. It is a sport, and we have to remember that. It is technologically driven, it's big budget, but it still has to have all the things that a sport has. It has to have drama, jeopardy, it has to be a meritocracy, it can't be a lottery. It has to be something that is a spectacle that draws people in because of something, whether that is, well, we have people engage with the sport in a variety of different ways. There are people who really follow the drivers, absolutely personality-driven. There are people who follow teams, as anybody would, a sports team, football team, hockey team, etc. There are those who love the technology, the geeks. We love the geeks. They're with us. We're all geeks. And there are people who identify with the politics and the Piranha Club, as it's known informally, that goes on behind the scenes. There's that constant politicking for political advantage, which is a part of any sport, I would argue. It's certainly technology-driven, and one of the things that Formula One has that differentiates it from any other motorsport series is that you have to own and create your own intellectual property, broadly. So every car is different. Every car is an interpretation of somebody's research and development program against that set of regulations. It is customized to the circuits, so cars that we race in a high downforce circuit like Monaco will be very different from cars that we race in the drag strip that is probably Monza, where we're doing 360 kilometers end of straight. And they're highly customized to the driver, because each driver has a slightly different way of perceiving the world. The cues that they pick up, their interpretation is slightly different. Their driving styles are slightly different. And those little nuances, when we're looking to get the maximum of the performance envelope that's available to us, make a difference. It's a business. I've explained to you some of that. Obviously, nobody can afford to spend that much money and go bust, so we have to commercialize that. And when we're commercializing that, we're very much looking at not just the entertainment value as far as broadcast media is, whether that's digital, terrestrial, pay TV. It's also, does it give us the kind of technical content that will draw in the big blue chip brands that are prepared to sponsor us and work with us as part of that sports marketing proposition. We race from March until the end of November. 20 races at the moment, each one attracting tens of millions of people in live viewage. And then when you look at the digital chopping up of that and the extension of that, it's a huge reach across the planet. It's a challenging season, and a lot is going on as we move around the world. And it starts to have some very similar feels and facets to putting any mobile operation. You arrive in country, unpack, pack up, shift on to the next one, and you have to be operational all the time in a prototype series, and I'll come back to that. So what does it take to win? Technical differentiation, competitive advantage is what we're looking for, and to win in Formula One, you have to be good at everything. And I mean from concept, if I just go down the timeline, from concept work, how good is our concept and our interpretation of those FIA regulations, to how effectively did we, I'm losing the audience already, how effectively did we convert the concept work into practical outcomes that a manufacturing and engineering organization can work on, to how quickly can we build the car, how well can we get the mechanics to work, and if we mess up in reliability, in our calculations, in our pit stops, in any part of the operation, it's immediately public and compromises that weekend, and it's over. It is not a fault-tolerant system, and it's very public. So we have to, in a way, we have to own that intellectual property map of the car. That's the underbody view of the car. And to be good, you have to be good at so many different pieces of it. So we want the best fuel molecules blended in the way that gives us the most efficient combustion model that we can find. We have to be masters of metals, of composite materials, of heat, of stiffness. Knowing where to spend stiffness on the car is a huge challenge for us. Do we spend it in the vertical moment? Do we spend it in the lateral or the torsional bit? It is a complete trade-off. We have to be masters of tire technology, thermodynamics, hydraulic systems, stress, strains, lightweight, efficient structures, with about 600 people, 600 or 700 people. It's not possible for us to kind of match the sort of knowledge and depth of experience that you have here in some of those domains, which makes Formula One an ideal environment for partnerships. And great teams and championships are made on great partnerships. Yes, the driver is very important, and I'll say that because we've got Lando Norris sitting over here who's driving for us next year. But it's teamwork and partnerships and how effectively they work together that differentiates one team from another ultimately. So no presentation would be complete without a reference to a Prussian general. So it was Helmut von Moltke in 1880 who said that no operational plan survives first contact with the enemy. And that's Fernando Alonso in the air, not going through our operational plan at the first turn of a Grand Prix last year. Things are chaotic in Formula One, and that is part of the drama and the spectacle that attracts so many people in. Now, fortunately, since the death of Ayrton Senna back in the 80s, the amount of work that's been done by the regulating body and the teams on safety is extraordinary. The safety structures that we still have some pretty fearful accidents and crashes, but for the most part, fortunately, we've got on top of that. But the idea of beaming footage of Ayrton Senna into the homes, which is what happened when Ayrton Senna was killed, is not on. Fortunately, this isn't the first time that Fernando's been in that similar situation, and he walked away from this one. But stuff does happen, and we have to be ready for that. Now, to some of our engineers, this is an electromechanical and chemical sensor actuator, and a highly paid one at that. But the driver is a very, very important part of the package. We talk about the package performance of the engine, the chassis, the operational performance, and very much the driver. And perhaps none more so than when you're racing somewhere like Monaco in the rain. If you went to the regulating body today and said, I've got a great idea, we're going to go racing around the streets of this very densely populated town in south of France, and shut the town for a period of time. And, oh, by the way, there's no runoff areas. We're just going to put up Encore around the place. You'd be laughed out of town, but we've been racing there for a long time. And you don't have small accidents at Monaco. There is nowhere to run off. If you miss your racing line, or you get tired, or by an inch or so, you wipe out the side of the car, and it's all over. And in qualifying, when it's just you and the circuit, and it's wet, then you test your drivers. You test their skill, you test their bravery, and you test their understanding of car control. And in those kind of circumstances, driver contribution is huge. But driver contribution outside of the car is equally important. As a member of the team, remember, everybody's getting out of bed. Nobody gets out of bed for shareholder value. It's a myth. But people will get out of bed for their heroes. And our drivers are our heroes. And on race weekend, they are Top Gun, and we look after them. And that's why we operate. We operate to give these guys the best chance that they can at a race win. So for us, it's really important how they are outside of the team. They help us with great feedback. The generation that we have now, and I say this with the greatest of respect to Lando, who's just 19, and the youngest of British Formula One drivers as he takes to the circuit in March of this year. That video game generation, the generation that's technically savvy around computers and data, is very helpful to us. Without naming them, I've worked with other drivers who were much more of a handful when it came to talking about what happened with the car. You know, basically the driver would get out, kick the tires, and say, fix it, it's rubbish. It's not very helpful to us. These guys unpack corners, entry by mid-corner by exit, what's happening on the gear shifts, what's happening with car stability, brake balance, and the workload in the cockpit is huge. One thing I think we've done a particularly poor job on as an industry is explaining the energy efficiency story inside Formula One. When I started in Formula One in 2001, we were using 6 engines in a race weekend. So the engines have gone from V12 to V10s to V8s to V6s. V6s now with hybrid energy stores in them, We're recovering kinetic energy from the braking systems, and we're recovering heat energy from the turbocharged systems. There's 2 electric motors. And the management of this round-trip energy efficiency is a really important part of what we do in Formula One. We start with custom fuel. So we're looking for custom fuels, custom oils for our car and our car only. The appetite of our engine, it's a Renault engine, but our fuel will be differentiated from the other Renault runners. And then once we've got that chemical energy, we're looking to convert that into tractive force as efficiently as possible. So lightweight structures, super low friction transmission, no sliding the car around the corners, very strong aerodynamics in a corner in curved air to make sure we give up as little momentum as possible going around the corners, and then we're conserving all of that energy to get to the end of the race without the driver having to lift and coast and save fuel at the end, and it's close from a fundamental physics point of view. Engine efficiency in Formula One has shifted enormously. You know, most automotive cars will be around the 30-35% engine efficiency if we're lucky, if it's not a hybrid. These Formula One cars are nearly 49% thermal efficiency, which is pretty extraordinary. And the combustion processes that operate within that are exceptional. And I'm very pleased that the lean combustion team here are working with us on the development of fuels and science of combustion. So we have 100 kilos of fuel to get from the start of the race to the end. That's it, and it's spending that wisely that differentiates. So let's look at the pressure of time. Most obviously, Formula One cars, from the best package on the grid to the worst package on the grid, is 4% product performance difference. I include the driver in that summary. Top 6 cars are separated by 0.15% product performance, and it's changing all the time. So these really is a marginal gains sum here. When we look for continuous improvement and high-speed R&D, we're looking for improvements everywhere and in anything at a rate at which we have to stay ahead of the competition. If you started with the fastest car in Australia and you did nothing, you'd be last by the time you get to the end of the year. And the grid is moving at about a tenth and a half of a second per lap improvement per race on an underlying R&D improvement, fueled by innovations in simulation and modeling, in analytics, much better data coming back from the cars because we're carrying a huge payload of sensors as sensors get lighter and go towards $0 in cost. And that feedback is just fueling, along with materials science, a greater insight into what we can do in this space from an engineering point of view. The development cycle for a Formula One car is also very short. Typically, we start concept work about 9 months out from the race. So around the May time, we're looking to our wind tunnel. We're putting a 60% scale wind tunnel model into the tunnel, and we're running that, and we're starting to think, under these regulations, what is the best permutation and combination of choices that we can make? Long lead items like gearboxes and transmission are coming out around the 6-month time. But once we get to about 4 months out, so we're talking around August, September time of the racing year, we're starting to switch much more of the resource onto next year's car. And the reason for that is that a Formula One car is something like 16,000 parts. And we're going to make 16,000 parts for the new car between August and the first test, which is going to be in February. That's a really short period of time. And we're going to pull those parts through our supply chain and design cycle. And if you take the car that we raced at the end of the year and you compare it from a bill of materials point of view to the car that we had at the first test, the carryover parts will be about 10%, or it's 90% all new. Now, we haven't made the first race car for 2019 yet. Lando will be revealing that to the world on February the 14th, and then go straight on to test that in Barcelona. But there's one thing I know already. That car is obsolete. Because by the time that we've made it, the research team's already moved on, and what we're releasing now is we're releasing the first upgrade package. So we expect the upgrades for the Australia race to improve the car that we haven't yet built or made, and that is the way it is, all the way through the season. An engineering change to the car every 20 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, from the moment that we've released it to the moment that we retire it, up to the last race. So it is high-speed research and development that we're doing, and it's a prototype series. These are not cars that are tooled like conventional automotive industry, which would probably take three years to bring your car to market. Well, our sports series and the Super Series, the car that you may have seen here in one of the courtyards in Kaust, the red 650S, that's a sort of 3-year gestation period. Formula One cars are about 9 months from concept to test, and it's obsolete by the time you get there. Of course, you'll recognize this along with the rest of the world, that we've been through a number of digital transformations. There are wave after wave of whatever digital transformation means to you. For us, we saw, I think, the first wave of a fundamental belief around about 2000 that simulation was the way to go. And we started investing very heavily, and it was probably 7 years before we could convince the majority of the engineering organization and the drivers that stepping into a driver-in-the-loop simulator was some way realistic compared to being in a racing car. But that was a fundamental belief that we needed to get away from empirical part throwing and get into something that was much more science-based. Today, in a Formula One car, we're taking data off it at about 4 megabits a second. We'd like to take off much more than that because we're limited by regulation on the bandwidth that we can use. And we're measuring around 17,000 parameters. Some of those are maths, some of those are physical parameters, but those 17,000 parameters, as they come off the car, are being distributed throughout the system. That means out of the car to the garage, from the garage to the engineering counter, from the engineering counter back to Woking, where we're doing our deeper simulation and our modeling, back out into the cloud to be stored, so that at a later date, we can feed that to the machine learning algorithms and then learn how to make better decisions at point of most knowledge out on the track. And for us, what that gives us is a really interesting proposition, because Formula One has been running connected cars for over 20 years. And if you unpack the elements that make connected cars, then we go sensors, edge computing, secure data distribution, real-time data transfer to a hub where we're running extraordinary gaming theory, Bayesian mathematics, inference maths, analytics in real time with our driver-in-the-loop simulator and putting that back into the cloud. If you step back, I think, and say, what do we have? We've got an Internet of Things proposition. And that's what we're doing with our McLaren Applied Technologies business, is taking elements of that stack and saying, how can we commercialize and use that in other fields? So we're working on some health analytic platforms, working connected rail with high-speed Wi-Fi, and the list goes on. State of the tick. One other thing about making decisions in real time is the reality of our world is there is never perfect data and there is never enough time. And yet the real world requires us to make decisions now and be ready. This is a time-dependent business. And for that very reason, what's important to us is humans in the loop. Now, much is made of a sort of some sort of doomsday scenarios about robotics and AI and engines. And I think there are good reasons for us to be cautious about some of the ethics of that. And I can sometimes be a little bit alarmed when I see what Boston Dynamics can do. I'm also intrigued by a lot of it. But fundamentally, I'm optimistic that actually humans in the loop as part of this network, which is where McLaren plays really well, is fundamentally important, and it enables us to get ahead of the competition faster, because we can't just mine the data without context. We can't rely on perfect information, and there is never enough time, yet things still have to happen. And my argument is that's where competitive advantage lives for us, because there are some things that we can offload to the AI engines, and we do. But fundamentally, that's where competitive advantage for us lives. I've mentioned it's not a fault-tolerant system, and as you go down from concept to engineering through manufacturing and a complex supply chain and you end up in the garage, then the management teams that we pick that we work in the garage are really all about drill and discipline. At the end of the day, if we think about a 2.1 second pit stop with 16 people involved, just how much room for innovation is there in that? It's a bit like a golf swing. We practice and we break down each one of the steps into 0.15 second intervals, I think is the biggest one, and it becomes just rhythm. And the moment that we break the rhythm or something goes wrong, as we've seen in some races, ourselves and others, it can go spectacularly wrong. But at this end of the process, we're trying to eliminate all of that concept work, all of that free, and we're getting down into just drill, discipline, repeat play to leave enough management bandwidth for us to handle strategy, weather, drivers, things that occur when no plan survives contact with the enemy. So we're about to launch our 16,000 parts with our electrochemical, mechanical, highly paid sensor actuator in it. And then we'll do 8 days of prototype testing before launching this product on 80 million people in Australia and be tested against that proposition. Can you race? Are you ready to win? It's a very stressful time. There's a lot of systems validation work to do before we can see performance. The car is changing all the time. And the reality is there's an awful lot of media froth that happens in that time, but nobody really knows whether you've got competitive advantage or not until Australia in qualifying. And then all the talking stops, and at that point you're on test, the moment of truth. For us at McLaren, we have always believed in equality of our drivers. That is that each driver, as a team, we win as a team. We need the drivers to split the workload in order of validating and testing parts for us. But we expect each driver to have equal competitive opportunity. So even though the car is customized to them, their choice of parts out the back, out of the parts bin, will be fundamentally the same. And we expect them to compete with each other during qualifying and during the race. As the season develops, we'll then start to think about whether it makes any sense for strategic or championship reasons to favor one driver or another. But what we can't do is breach that piece of trust with a driver. And I can't imagine, but some teams do, having a primary driver and a backup driver, where when you come into the garage on a Friday before you qualify on Saturday and then race on a Sunday, how do I feel if I'm structurally at a disadvantage being told I'm always number 2? And we don't think that brings out the best of us as a race team. It's not something that's in our value set, and it's not something we think is reasonable on our drivers. So McLaren fiercely defends its equivalency on our driver opportunity. Behind the scenes as well is an extraordinary logistics exercise. The unsung heroes of Formula One who move in the night, in the evenings when everybody else has gone home. We take 40 tons of freight and 100 people around the globe to every race. Routinely, if I turn up at a check-in desk, I'll have what we laughingly call hand luggage that requires 3 porters and trolleys to wheel it with me as I check it in, which are the last-minute upgrades. And this structure you see on the top left-hand side here is our hospitality, or our brand center, as we refer to it. And that and all the freight that goes around between Europe takes around 20 lorries to unpack. So when we do triple headers, which means racing at one point in Europe, then the next weekend, and then the next weekend, this is set up, torn down, set up, torn down, and moved throughout the world. Seamless borders, moving fuel in and out of across to Baku and through the Russian borders is always a challenge, but our logistics is extraordinary. So as you mentioned, as Manny said at the beginning of this, I worked in the defense industry, and I'm kind of ashamed to say that in the defense industry, on a major platform like a military aircraft program, your customer thinks you're great if they get the product in the same year in which you ordered it. You are not going to be a minute late for a Formula One Grand Prix race. Those lights are going out whether you're ready or not. And what that does for us, and what I see is the big difference in the industry between the expectations of an engineering and science team in terms of just getting things to happen now, is the value of time. Time as a commodity for us is incredibly precious, so we can't afford to squander it. But it is a public test, and you have to be there. It's just not possible to be late or ask them to hold up for a while. With that pressure, and with the drumbeat of a race every fortnight, there are a number of things that we need to pay attention to in terms of creativity. And I want to cite some work that some of you may know, but that was done by Teresa Amabile of Harvard University and some of her team, when she did some work, particularly on how managers kill creativity. And one of the things that kills creativity is putting people on a treadmill. And you can imagine, given the environment or the context that I've just described, it would be very easy for us just to set up multiple shifts of hammering this out every fortnight, pick it up, move it, shift it, etc. But what she wrote about and her team wrote about was that under extreme time pressure, and this is the Apollo 13 image that I'm using here, where in that particular scenario, on a life and death scenario, armed with a plastic bag full of bits, if you believe the film narrative from Hollywood, a group of people solved what was a very challenging program under extreme time pressure by being creative. And under those where there is a life and death situation or something that's very important, people will give of their best under pressure. The other one that she cites is where there are long periods where the cause is so important. One might pick either a cure for cancer or some of the work that's being done in Alzheimer's disease, for example. Although the results may be negative and there'll be long periods of time without success, the cause in itself is sufficiently important for mankind that people will follow that and will go with it. What people won't do is get out of bed just to be on a treadmill. And one of the things that we do very carefully when we look at punctuating our race is shortening those limits of where people can see what they've done. Does it make a difference? Have we recognized and have we fed that back? Have we learned all there is to learn now and reset before we go again every fortnight? So the learning loops inside Formula One are really interesting, very short, and it allows us to prototype things and have a go and try things, and then we unwind them again if it hasn't been successful. But that ability to keep the creativity going is very important to us. And as I've said earlier, there is the fear of failure, the joy of success, and the relentless pursuit of better. We know that in a number of areas what we've just done can be improved upon. And that's what drives our whole organization. Many tribes, in terms of the software engineers, the pragmatists, the Isambard Kingdom Brunels, the drill and discipline guys in the garage, are all picked as being pertinent cultural sets for that part of the process. It's not a one-size-fits-all for our management development processes. But the key then in organizational design becomes how we have the conversations that make those teams play as one process, as one team. And I hope what I've been able to show you, or at least resonate with you, is that what goes on behind the race is enormous. The scale of undertaking and the ambition of the challenge in Formula One is huge. So we're here because for us, blue sky research, if I think about some of our timescales and investment programs, blue sky for us, if I'm realistic, in Formula One is about 18 months. Because we're rapid technology followers. And we can't be good at everything, so we need partnerships. And we can't afford the time, because we've got the challenge on us in 2 weeks' time, to be in the fundamental science. So we have to stand on the shoulders of people who are doing extraordinary science to make sure that we pick that up quickly. That's why we're here. Because you are doing extraordinary science, and we want some of that. We're working in these areas. Some of you who are here this morning will have heard Mark and Matteo and Manny talk a bit more about some of that in CFD and other areas. These are really exciting programs, but it is just a toe in the water. There's a lot more that we can and will do together, I'm sure. But most of all, we, because you're on the team as well, we are McLaren. And we're going to make a difference. We're going to do some things that are extraordinary. We're going to try some things. We're going to work with you. And we are so proud and privileged to be here with you. And I thank you for your time here this evening. Thank you very much. So what I am going to do now is to bring on stage Lando. Lando Norris is one of our new Formula One racing drivers for 2019. Formula 3 champion, youngest British Formula One driver, a huge talent in the making, particularly for those of you that may have seen him doing the gaming, the simulator gaming over in the science fair today. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Lando Norris. Oh, mate, I didn't mean what I said about the sensors. Forgive me, because I've got a few questions that I'm going to ask that I've written in my book here, so I'll take that as scripted. We are going to have a little bit of time, I think, just checking for some open questions, so bear with me a second. Lando, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone.
Perhaps first of all, when you're in the off season, which is sort of from the end of November until now, and you're thinking about the season ahead, how much time do you spend thinking about what it's like to drive a Formula One car?
All the time, too much. Formula One has been my dream since I was since I first saw motorsport, so around 6-7 years old. Formula One has been my dream, so every opportunity I've had to be involved, to think about it, to dream about it, I have done. So a lot of time, especially now that I'm going into Formula One, a lot of my time in the off-season is trying to improve and be ready, get ready, working with the team, yourselves, to be prepared as possible, basically, and arrive in Australia in the first test, knowing that I'm confident I can perform and do the job that I need to do.
Thank you very much. So I'm not suggesting that you're old enough to write your memoirs at the moment, but can you remember, if you go back, can you remember a time when you thought, this is it, this is what I want to do? Was there a sort of a moment?
Well, I think I started dreaming I wanted to be in Formula One since, like I said, 6, 7 years old. First of all, I wanted to be in motorbikes, but then, I had a crash and I didn't like that anymore. But for the first time I could think for myself, and I realized I wasn't doing it for fun. I wasn't doing it for a hobby. I was realizing that Formula One is what I want to do in my life, is my goal. I reckon when I was around 13, 14, when that's already almost 5 years into my career, let's say, of karting and racing in general. But that's the first time when I honestly thought that I'm good enough, I think. And if I work hard enough, I can eventually get into Formula One. And that's when I started working with more people, having a manager, a trainer, having people around me which could help myself get to my dream of Formula One.
And just on that, as you prepare for the coming season, do you like to prepare? Do you need the space to be alone? Do you like a team around you? How does that work? I don't suppose we give you much choice.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's nice to have an off season and be home and go on holiday with the family, or just be home with the family. But at the same time, I love racing so much. I still, like I said earlier, I always keep thinking about it and want to be involved and be prepared as possible. So, although off season is a time to rest and separate yourselves from motorsports and just be at home, I pretty much spend a lot of my time on the simulator. So I have my own apartment, and in my apartment I have a simulator where I spend countless amount of hours driving, enjoying, and preparing for whatever race or obstacle I have coming up in the future. So I don't just do it sometimes for enjoyment. A lot of the time I spend on the simulator, whether it's at McLaren or at my home simulator, is preparing for whatever I can. If I'm in a race and I'm in a situation that I've been in on the simulator, I'm stuck behind someone at a certain track, maybe there's a corner which I was able to overtake on the simulator, and then I can replicate it on the actual track. And it's been done before. So these kind of things I prepare in the off season, and I enjoy doing, I'd say 24/7.
Thank you. Last question from me before I ask the audience here. You and I both know Formula One is not a fault-tolerant system. And as you're in the car headed out on a qualifying lap, where it's you, the machine, and the circuit at that point, the mental pressure must be huge, because split-second decisions or mistakes,
it's everything.
It's everything. So, with that mental pressure in mind, how do you prepare to handle that?
It's difficult. I think the biggest thing to prepare you for racing is to do more racing. So for myself, starting in karting, doing 5, almost 6 years of karting, then going into car racing, doing a numerous amount of years in car racing, everything helps you prepare, and there's nothing better, I don't think, in any situation than doing the actual job. So for myself, I always get nervous in the beginning of any race, even if I'm on the simulator or at the track itself. I get nervous, and there's not a lot of things, I don't think. I have a mental coach, so after every race weekend or before every race weekend, I go over things which I've struggled on. I go over things with the team that I've struggled on, and things we need to improve. And things like that and areas like that are where you can find those last few hundreds. Yeah. And for myself to be confident in going out into a qualifying session, a practice session, race, and performing is all down to those small gains, basically. So I prepare in any way I can, but for any qualifying lap, especially being with McLaren and in Formula One, the pressure is huge. and my heart rate goes through the roof at any point I'm driving in the car. But you know, knowing how many people, like you said earlier, are back at McLaren, working, how many people are relying on myself. Everything is on the line for me, basically. So when I go out and drive, one of my biggest motivators is coming in after I've done well, hopefully. We won a race, or I'm on the podium, or I qualified on pole, and seeing everyone be happy. And you know, all the hard work that I know goes into the team, and seeing that getting rewarded from the other side is a big motivator, and that's what, in some ways, distracts me from the pressure and the worries of going out and having to perform. Is thinking about that and believing I can do a good job.
Lando, thank you. That was really insightful. Thank you very much. Your throat open. So we do have, let me put this down, we do have a little bit of time for some questions from the audience, easy ones, I hope. There's a gentleman in the back with the blue shirt, if we can get a microphone to him. Good catch.
Nice talk. So do you think in 10 years we will see AI in the cockpit of a Formula One car?
Do I think we'll see AI in the cockpit of the
Hopefully
Formula
not.
One car? There's a man who wants a long career. I think the answer is that I hope to some extent, because I think the sport has to move with the times and with the technology. But I think for Formula One to be as engaging as it is, and for it to have a relevance, I think there has to be an element of human endeavor and human challenge in this. Otherwise, it just becomes robo-racing. And whilst that's interesting in another, it's certainly not commercial, so it's not a business model that would fly at the moment. So I think an element of it, yes. If I'm being slightly controversial, I would say that I think it's unlikely that our regulating body would have the imagination to embrace that, but you never know. There's one over there.
I'm just curious, how similar is the simulator to the actual driving? Like, do you find that it actually is very representative of how it feels when you're actually driving the car?
It very much depends on what you're looking for. I think in the whole perspective, if I was at McLaren on the simulator, the amount of effort and hours they go into trying to correlate the exact car versus the simulator is amazing. So when you overlay the data from the simulator and you overlay it against the actual track data, it looks identical. You just say it's another lap. So from their point of view and the data and everything, it's one of the most amazing tools you can have, apart from driving on the actual track. But for myself, I think it's getting better and better. So every week there's improvements. Every month, you know, there's virtual reality now. So there's so many things coming out which are improving the simulator itself. But there's two big things which you miss in any simulator in the whole world, which is G-force and fear factor. And especially when you're in a Formula One car going 300k plus, 350k, you can get very scared. So that kind of thing, which you can't really replicate in a simulator, is something which is probably the thing which gives you the most feeling, the most correspondence between the car and you when you go out and drive on track. And unless your simulator is, I don't know how big, size of many football pitches, you can't really replicate the G-forces either. So everything else apart from the two things you can't replicate, it's amazing, and you can drive and you can learn, you know, different techniques. You can, every race I'll go to this year, I'll be on the simulator for a day or 2 days, preparing for that race. And 100%, I learn things, and when I get to the track, I know the lines, the curbs to hit, race starts. I know everything to be able to go into the race and feel confident. But in terms of that final bit of feeling real, there's those two things that you can't replicate, but are the two big things that you miss.
Can I just build on that? Because I think Lando makes a very insightful point there, which is it depends how you use the tool. All models are models, and we try and correlate very closely. What we're trying to do with it is make a fundamentals engineering tool to make those trade-offs. And one of the challenges that we have just from the physics of the thing, the physics engine is okay, tire models have got better, but under motion queuing for sustained G, in order to give the driver that full immersion, you need such a long rate of travel that actually graphics becomes a problem. And a high yaw slewing of graphics is an issue. So we're waiting for lightweight, high-speed, faster processed VR to be able to give ourselves more a more longitudinal lateral travel, surge and sway, to get a greater sense of motion. But right now, in terms of fundamentals engineering, for the bit that we use it for, it's very useful. And what we're now doing is putting more instruments on the car to give us that sense of what's going on in reality so that we understand the difference. There's also some at the back here. Pass the parcel. Hi.
Hi, thank you for the talk. It was very interesting, inspirational, and just like it's a very good learning experience. So I have two questions. First of all, your competitors, which are other companies and other drivers, like, have you experienced parts when they, like, not copy, but like see your ideas and get inspired by it, or maybe have you guys done that? Or and my second question is, well, it's more directed to you. What did you feel when they said yes, you're allowed to come in F1?
Oh, fantastic questions. You paused for a second. So that is, well, I admire your courage in an audience for speaking out and asking those questions in the way that you did. They're brilliant questions. So to your point about copying, then yeah, absolutely. Like in any other industry, you're watching all of the moves of your competitors. We will take around 2,000 photos, digital images, not at random, but targeted where we're allowed to in the pit lane into the garages of the competitors to look at their product and their evolution. It's not helpful to lift a front wing off a Ferrari and put it on a McLaren from an engineering point of view, because the car works as a whole. It's a system of systems, and therefore it doesn't separate easily in terms of setting up the flows on the car is very different. But understanding their research direction, looking at the product development, looking at where the car is becoming more detailed relative to ours is a really important part of using it, because otherwise we're just wasting other people's research and development, and we want the benefit not only of our own research and development, we really want to learn as much as we can from the 10 other interpretations of those regulations. So to your point, absolutely, yes. Lando, how did it feel?
It felt amazing. I think, as I said earlier, my dream since I was so young was to be in Formula One. But to do it even more so with McLaren, who have such a history of the drivers they brought up, the drivers they won championships with. I think everything put together, knowing how long the journey's been, how much hard work I've put in, but also everyone around me's put in. A lot of it's relief, I guess, but the feeling it's almost hard to describe until I think I drive on the track for the first time. So when I'll be in Australia, the lights are coming on for the start. I think that's going to be my best feeling. And the first time, I think, for real, I'm in Formula One. I'm 20 drivers, out of 20 drivers in the world, out of so many who want to be a Formula One driver. Yeah, I think that's the time I'm going to think how much of an honor it is for myself to be there. But yeah, I think the first time I got told, I'm with McLaren, I'm with Formula One, I was obviously very happy. So yeah, it's hard to describe because there's so much stuff that goes into it. It's not just, and it's not just a small change in my life. It's a massive change. So until you really get to feel it for yourself, it's difficult to describe.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your presentation, and I wish you all the best for the next championship.
Thank you.
Just one question. I was reading that there are some movements that they're pushing that the Formula One becomes totally electric. And of course, probably FEI, they won't allow it. But as a team, as McLaren team, do you think like you would be able to do that, and would you be likely to do that? Because otherwise, it will take the sense of Formula One, which is the combustion, right? So that's my question.
So the real answer to that question is it depends who you ask. Just in terms of McLaren's position on that, then when Formula E came to Riyadh in December, every one of those cars was running a McLaren battery. It wasn't branded or labeled as a McLaren battery, but that was something that our Applied Technologies division provides to Formula E. So we're a provider of electric power. We also developed the energy recovery system for Honda. So the battery, the systems integration of motor generator units for kinetic and heat energy. So we're in that space and we are watching it carefully. For our own automotive cars, then the path through hybridization first, and then probably if we look down the line, then EV at the appropriate time. I think that Formula One needs to be contemporary in some way, but also leading, and therefore it has to resonate with a broad audience. And for most of us at the moment, as far as we can see, that looks like hybridization, and we're a big supporter of that. I think when people do the comparisons between Formula E and Formula One, they're interesting. They're very different value propositions, but I suspect at some point in the future, I don't know when that is, there'll have to be some kind of convergence, because as the rest of society moves into probably increased electronic vehicles, then Formula One can't be anachronistic. It has to be contemporary in some way. Okay.
Hello,
Hi.
here to your left. Thank you for an entertaining talk. I'll ask a rather light-hearted question. So in a hypothetical situation, how much would one have to pay to have their own Formula One simulator?
Oh, right.
Hypothetical.
I think I can answer that. Is that a bid? So, the nuts and bolts of building the motion system, the chassis, putting the system together, and just dropping the physics engine and the tyre model in and putting all that together is probably £300,000-400,000. The IP that's gone into 20 years of studying motion cueing, physics, the parameterizing, what are around 3,500 parameters that set up that model, is priceless. So we come and talk to you and say, well, the nuts and bolts we can do for this money, what are you worth for the rest of the IP? But it's of that order.
I think going on from that, you can have a Formula One simulator, and you can obviously have a slightly lower level simulator. So you can have one like that was in the library near the science fair. You can get for, I would say cheap, $1,000, $2,000 or something, pounds or dollars. And then you go up to the one you have in
all 19-year-olds think £2,000 is cheap. Did you know that?
No, I didn't say it's cheap. No. But it depends. You know, no one. I'm sure there's maybe a couple, but there's very few people in the whole world which have a Formula One simulator. There's a lot more people who have more of a gaming seat, pedals, and so on. And then there's kind of a middle ground where there's a very professional simulator where you can replicate as many things as possible through steering movement, pedals, but you don't have the priceless amount of cueing, movement, and everything like that. So it depends what you're looking for, really.
I think we've got time for one more before we have to close that. One in the back. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for the presentation. I have a question like, what is the best you have done for regarding the techniques for the Formula One to make your speed better and better? What is it that you have done during these years in matter of engineering?
Sorry?
FTAC?
Yeah, I mean, we've done a number of innovative products or programs, but fundamentally, I think it's about the management of talent and keeping that creative mindset going. We're constantly having to ask ourselves the question, is the team that we've got genuinely world-class. And when you're on public tests, you're asking that the whole time. Having a great engine partner has been fundamental to us. We've struggled a bit there in recent years, but we know that working with Renault, they're capable of winning races, so we know that's something that we can check the box. Having great racing drivers is really important to us. We can check the box there. So I think in terms of where we are most on test is how good are we fundamentally at getting our aerodynamics right. And that's really what let us down in 2018. And we're on test for 2019 in that area. And we've been really focused on what it takes to put a great aerodynamic package together, given that a Formula One car is driving around a corner and is actually effectively running in curved air. And that's impossible to do in a wind tunnel and very challenging to do in computational fluid dynamics. So aerodynamics, I think, is where we need to be, make a big step forwards.
Thank you.
Good. Ladies and gentlemen, can I just ask you to thank Lando Norris here this evening for giving us your time and being so insightful. Lando, I think stay on the stage for a second. Now, if I'm right, then hold on. I'm handing over the reins. I'm free fall now. It's over to you.
We'd like to thank you very much for coming to CALS.
Oh, well.